All right, guys. Today we're going to be talking about the device that I love to hate, the Hydromax, or even like the Hydromax Extreme here. This is mostly going to be focused around these two products, but it is applicable for all pumping in general. But in particular, the biggest drawbacks of these devices is that you don't know what pressure you're pumping with, okay? You could get into trouble that way. Well, that's what we're going to be breaking down today is what pressures are used, what's the safe pressure to use, how to avoid injuries. When we're talking about pressure, so if you look at the Hydromax official site, okay, the BM official site, what they say is that for the Hydromax, your baseline model, it uses about 0.35 bars of negative pressure, okay, which equals about 10.47 inches of mercury. To be clear, when you look at the Peyronie's disease experts, when they talk about, because actually, believe it or not, Peyronie's disease, people pump for Peyronie's disease correction. They never recommend going more than 10 inches of mercury. I'm going to talk about what I recommend as far as pressure, but if just looking at the experts, they never recommend more than that because they say that there's an increased risk of damage. So just keep that in mind. I already have my medical disclaimer that came up in the lower bottom. So do what you feel comfortable with doing. The baseline entry-level model is already exceeding that max tolerance. We're going to talk more about it. But when you're talking about the Hydromax, which is what this is, the Hydromax, this uses 0.45 bars of negative pressure, which is equal to 13.46 inches of mercury. So now we're getting into actually, possibly dangerous territory with just this thing alone. Then when you bring out this bad boy, this uses 0.55 bars of negative pressure, which is equal to 16.4 inches of mercury. 6-inch ribbon curls, if you know, you know.
6-inch ribbon curls, honey.
That's impossible.
6 inches.
So why does this matter, guys? It matters because when you're talking about like standard pressure recommendations, historically speaking, at least on our Getting Bigger subreddit, it's like, BD typically recommended about 5 to 7 inches of mercury. Very reasonable guidelines, very safe guidelines. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he has amended that and recommends slightly higher pressure. So when we're talking about actual physiology, what is an actual physiologic erection? An actual physiologic erection is anywhere between 4 to 7 inches of mercury just at baseline. That is with no further stimulation, just getting an erection. But if you are actually engaging in sexual intercourse, you can have erection pressures that go up to several hundred millimeters of mercury. Several hundred millimeters of mercury. We're talking about much higher pressures. What I typically recommend now is gradually working your way up to higher pressures. What is that based on? Well, it's actually based on real data. And surely you're going to say,
Oh, Hank, there's no real data for actual pumping, is there?
yes. In fairness, it's in rats. But here's an excerpt from one of the studies that I've talked about anti-LOX. If you haven't seen my videos on anti-lysyl oxidase, I made 2 videos. Please check them out. I'll explain it in even more detail. But here's an excerpt. So what they found is that 200 millimeters of mercury and anti-LOX lengthened the penis by 14.05%, while 300 millimeters of mercury plus anti-LOX lengthened it by 19.84%, suggesting that a higher mechanical force resulted in longer lengthening. So there you go, guys. They are saying in this study that they recommended a higher pressure. But wait, isn't that going to lead to an increased risk of damage? Well, they addressed that too. Here we go. Our previous studies revealed that 300 millimeters of mercury slightly increased the side effects than 200 millimeters of mercury. However, 400 millimeters or even 500 millimeters of mercury showed significantly elevated side effects. Therefore, we determined that 300 millimeters of mercury was a more suitable force for penile lengthening. This is an animal study. This is not in humans, so it might not necessarily translate 1-to-1. But they looked at different pressures and said, we're going to go light, medium, and heavy to see which is the best. And they say, well, actually, medium is better than light, but heavy causes too much side effects, so we're going to recommend this medium dose in this study. For comparison, 300 millimeters of mercury is 12 inches of mercury, or INHG. So a lot of people just refer to this as like HG. It's referred to that incorrectly, but that's just one of my pet peeves that I need to get over, but it really is 12 inches of mercury. So therefore, when we're talking about these models here, so what do I recommend as far as like what is a safe level with which you can use? So if you just have that baseline hydro model, You can go all the way up to like say you can't pump out any water. You can tolerate max, as long as you're gradually working your way up to that, you can go to max strength. If you have the Hydro Max, once again, you can gradually work your way up because this Hydro Max is actually going to 13.46 inches of mercury. That is still higher than what they recommend even in that rat study because once again, they use 300 millimeters of mercury, which is right at about 12 inches of mercury. So I still would not recommend you max out the Hydro Max, but you can go almost to 100%. However, when you're using the Big Daddy, this goes all the way up to 16.4 inches of mercury. That's significantly higher than that 12 inches of mercury recommended in that rat study. And this is also higher than what I would recommend you safely do. So with people who use this, I never recommend that they go any higher than about 90%. If you're going 90% pressure with this, you're still pumping at about 14 inches of mercury, guys. That's still a lot of pressure and higher than what I would recommend as the safely tolerated pressure. So never max out with this, but even, you want to leave a little space at the bottom. It's hard to calculate how much pressure. It's really like 90%. What do you mean by that, Hank? Well, I'm talking about really compression of these bellows at the bottom. You want to compress like only 90% of the way, not 100% of the way where it's completely compressed at the bottom, or you can't advance any water further out by squeezing this. And guys, just for the record, that is why I switched to this pump from PMP. These are actually the Hydro Vibes from the BM company, but this has a pressure gauge where you can see exactly what you're pumping to. And it's also transparent so you can see the discoloration. So hopefully that makes sense as far as the pressure recommendations. But we also need to talk about other considerations. First and foremost, you need to pump slowly if you are using any of these water-based devices. Why? Because water does not compress. So when you are pumping out the water, you press down, water shoots out, you have a direct and an immediate equal rise in pressure inside the chamber in negative pressure. If you are not careful and you just boom and you just squeeze out a big gust of water, you can literally cause a dramatic increase in pressure. And there are guys who injure themselves from this device, not because this device is inherently dangerous from using higher pressures, but because they get to those pressures too quickly. They go from 0 to 10 inches of mercury like that, if you will, and that's what causes the problem. If you are using these devices, you want to gradually, slowly pump out the pressure, pump out the pressure, pump out the pressure, and give it the time to adjust. What you're going to see is that when you put your junk in these devices and you slowly start to pump up, these bellows are going to compress. And then once the pressure equalizes between drawing blood into your actual penis and the negative pressure in there, the bellows are going to start to elongate. It's something similar if you use an actual pressure gauge. You pump up to 5 inches of mercury and gradually there's going to be an equilibrium, but the extra blood being drawn into the chamber is going to equalize with the negative pressure in there, and it's going to cause a pressure drop. So you're going to need to keep applying pressure to reach until you reach that, for lack of a better word, homeostasis level. The other key thing, guys, is especially with these devices that don't have the hand pump or don't have the pump like on that, Peak Male Physique pump, is that you are jamming this into your pelvis. So here is a picture here at the base of the actual penis, where what we call your pubic symphysis is, the nerves, like the dorsal nerve of the penis, that's where a lot of those nerves actually come from inside your pelvis out and onto the surface of your penis. So if you were jamming that device down into that area, you can literally put yourself at risk of nerve damage by hitting that area and compressing it, because this is such a terrible design by having to jam this out. You want to use some kind of hand pump, so the pressure is done by the hand pump, not by mechanically jamming something into your pelvis. You are also going to want to use some kind of citrulline-based product. The reason for this, number one, is going to help with erection quality. I've said it before, the more hard you are going into the pump, the better your results are going to be. So it can help with that. Number two, it's going to help with recovery and help with maintaining healthy endothelial cells, like the actual lining of the actual penile vascular tissue. So similarly, guys, hopefully you have seen my video that I just made about fibrosis. Phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitors, PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra or Cialis, also can work wonders on preserving your endothelial tissue, especially I would say if you're into like your 30s or beyond. I would strongly recommend you consider talking to your doctor about using one of those products to see if it's right for you. I sound like an infomercial right there. See if it's right for you. Another thing is I would add in length work, guys. When you are manually like stretching and expanding that tunica by either like using manual stretches, if you haven't seen my video on manual stretches, you should check that out, or using an extender or using some sort of hanging device. I do personally believe that it's actually priming the tunica, or like allowing the tunica to be more prone to expansion and elongation. You should consider doing that before pumping, in my personal opinion. So what are some of my personal tips for success, guys? I can't tell you how many videos I have made on the actual like BM device, but I just made a pumping troubleshooting video where I break down the reasons why you're not gaining by using your pump, what you're probably doing wrong, and that was part of a QA. I made a pumping part 1 and a pumping part 2 video where I actually break down the science and the actual like urologic journal articles talking about using vacuum erection devices. I also have a video on pumping, whether you're using interval or traditional pumping, and what do I think is best as far as getting results. And I also have a video purely on the BM device as far as tips and tricks, guys. So I have all of this pumping material, and I am going to be putting a playlist together. But I've made all of these videos, guys, for you to reference, and I talk about a lot of this stuff in more detail, and I don't want to go over all of that for time's sake. So guys, you have to know how to pump safely, pump correctly, and most importantly, learn how to avoid injury, because what's the point of getting bigger if your junk doesn't work? So hopefully this video was helpful. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.